The auctioneer's gavel cracked like a gunshot, and the orc girl flinched so hard her chains rattled against the wooden platform. Nathan Torres felt his stomach turn over as he watched her shrink back from the crowd of men pressing close to the auction block, their eyes crawling over her hunched form like flies on meat. She could not have been more than 19, small for an orc woman, barely 5.5 feet tall with delicate tusks that curved no longer than his thumbnail. Her green skin was mottled with bruises, her dark hair tangled and filthy, and someone had dressed her in nothing but a rough hemp shift that hung past her knees. When a bearded man in a leather vest reached up to grab her ankle, she made a sound like a wounded animal. Nathan's hand shot up before he could think better of it. $200. The crowd fell silent. The auctioneer, a fat man with a handlebar mustache and watery blue eyes, blinked at him in surprise. The bid was triple the opening price, enough to buy a good horse or half a season's seed. Nathan felt every eye in the barn turn toward him, measuring, judging, speculating on what exactly a young rancher would want with damaged goods like her. 200 going once, the auctioneer called, recovering quickly. His voice held a note of glee. Going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the back. Come settle your account, sir. Nathan pushed through the crowd, ignoring the muttered comments and knowing looks. His face burned, but he kept his eyes on the girl. She had gone perfectly still on the platform, staring at him with wide amber eyes that held no hope, only a kind of dull resignation that made his chest ache. He counted out the bills with hands that wanted to shake, took the receipt and the key to her shackles, and climbed the 3 steps to the platform. "Congratulations on your purchase," the auctioneer said, pressing the key into his palm with a conspiratorial wink. "She's young and healthy. Ought to give you years of service if you break her proper." Nathan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He turned to the girl and held up the key where she could see it. "I'm going to unlock your chains now. I'm not going to hurt you." She did not respond, did not even blink. Up close, he could see that her wrists and ankles were rubbed raw beneath the iron cuffs, old wounds layered over older scars. Her hands trembled as he unlocked first one wrist, then the other, then knelt to free her ankles. The chains fell away with a heavy clatter. He straightened and gestured toward the barn door. "Come on. Let's get out of here." For a moment he thought she would refuse, would simply collapse where she stood. Then she took one halting step forward, then another, moving like someone who expected the floor to open up and swallow her. Nathan fell into step beside her, close enough to catch her if she fell but careful not to touch her. The crowd parted reluctantly, men leering and women turning their faces away in disgust. An orc in the settlements was rare enough. An orc girl bought off an auction block was a scandal wrapped in sin. His wagon waited in the dusty yard outside, hitched to a patient bay mare who flicked her ears at their approach. Nathan opened the back gate and laid out a wool blanket over the bed. "You can ride back here. It's about 2 hours to my place." The girl stared at the wagon bed, then at him, then back at the wagon. Finally, she climbed in with awkward, stiff movements and settled herself in the far corner, knees drawn up to her chest, arms wrapped tight around her shins. Nathan closed the gate, climbed onto the driver's bench, and clicked his tongue at the mare. The wagon lurched into motion, wheels crunching over gravel and dirt. The autumn sun slanted low through the pine trees as they left the settlement behind, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Nathan kept the mare to an easy walk, glancing back every few minutes to check on his passenger. She had not moved from her corner, had not made a sound. Her eyes tracked the passing landscape with a kind of desperate intensity, as though she were memorizing every tree and stone. He had not planned this. When he had ridden into Pine Ridge that morning to sell a calf and pick up supplies, he had not imagined he would return with a traumatized orc girl and an empty wallet. His ranch was small, just 100 acres of grazing land in the eastern foothills, enough to support a modest herd of cattle and a few horses. He lived alone in a 2-room cabin his grandfather had built 40 years ago, back when the frontier had been wilder and the orc clans had still held the mountain passes. He did not need help. He certainly did not need the kind of trouble that came with harboring an orc. But he could not have left her there, could not have walked away and let some other man buy her, some man who saw her as livestock or worse. His mother had raised him better than that, even if she had been dead these past 5 years. The sun had set by the time they reached his property, darkness pooling thick beneath the trees. Nathan lit the lantern hanging from the wagon side and guided the mare up the long track to the cabin. Lamplight glowed warm in the windows. He had left the fire banked that morning, and the chimney trailed a thin ribbon of smoke into the evening sky. The barn stood dark and silent to the left, the chicken coop quiet beyond it. He set the brake and climbed down, every muscle in his back protesting. It had been a long day. He lowered the wagon's gate and stood back. "We're here. Come on inside and I'll get you something to eat." The girl emerged slowly, her bare feet finding the dirt with cautious precision. She followed him to the cabin door but stopped on the threshold, hesitating. Nathan realized she was waiting for permission. He pushed the door open and stepped aside. "Go on in. It's all right." She slipped past him like a shadow and stood just inside the door, hands clasped in front of her, head bowed. Nathan hung his hat on the peg, shrugged out of his coat, and moved to the hearth to stir up the fire. Flames licked up around the fresh logs, throwing dancing light across the room. The cabin was simple but clean. A stone fireplace, a rough table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, shelves lined with books and supplies. A ladder led to the loft where he stored grain and tools. He filled the kettle from the water barrel and hung it over the fire to heat, then rummaged through his stores for bread and cheese and the last of yesterday's stew. The girl watched him in absolute silence, her expression unreadable. He set the food on the table and pulled out one of the chairs. "Sit down, you must be starving." She did not move. Nathan frowned, pulling out the other chair for himself and settling into it with a sigh. "Look, I know you've had a rough time, but you're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you. Please sit and eat." Still she did not move. Her eyes flickered to the food, then away, then back again. Her throat worked as she swallowed. Finally, in a voice like gravel and smoke, she spoke. "Master does not eat first." The word hit him like a fist to the gut. Nathan lurched to his feet, the chair scraping loud against the floor. "I'm not your master. Don't call me that." She flinched and dropped to her knees so fast he heard the impact, her forehead nearly touching the floor. "Forgive this one. This one did not mean to offend." "No, no, no." Nathan crouched down, hands out, careful not to touch her. "You didn't offend me." "You don't have to kneel. Please get up." She lifted her head just enough to look at him, confusion and fear warring in her amber eyes. "This one does not understand." "I'm not your master," Nathan repeated, slower this time, gentler. "I bought you off that block because I couldn't stand to see you there. I'm going to take you to the county line and set you free. You don't owe me anything. You're not a slave. Do you understand?" She stared at him for a long moment, and then, impossibly, her eyes filled with tears. She pressed her forehead to the floor again, and when she spoke her voice shook. "This one thanks the human. This one thanks him with breath and blood and bone. This one will serve him all her days." Nathan closed his eyes and dragged a hand down his face. This was going to be harder than he thought. "What's your name?" She hesitated. "This one is called Nara Silverbrook." "Nara." He tested the name, found it fit. I'm Nathan Torres, and I need you to get up off the floor and sit at the table and eat something, because you look like you're about to fall over. Nara rose slowly to her feet, moving as though she expected to be struck at any moment. She lowered herself into the chair with exaggerated care and stared at the food as though it might bite her. Nathan pushed the bowl of stew closer. Go ahead. She picked up the spoon with trembling fingers and took a small, tentative bite, then another. Then she was eating in great, gulping mouthfuls, tears streaming down her green cheeks, her whole body shaking with the force of her hunger. Nathan turned away to give her privacy, busying himself with pouring hot water into a basin and setting out a clean cloth and a bar of soap. When the bowl was empty, Nara set down the spoon and wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving smears of stew across her cheek. She looked up at Nathan with something like wonder. This one has not eaten hot food in many weeks. Well, you'll eat hot food here, Nathan said firmly. He gestured to the basin. You can wash up if you want. There's a screen in the corner for privacy. I'll see if I can find you something clean to wear. He rummaged through the chest at the foot of his bed and came up with an old shirt and a pair of trousers that had belonged to his father. They would be too big, but they were better than the filthy shift. He draped them over the screen and retreated to the far side of the room, turning his back to give her space. He heard the soft splash of water, the quiet rustle of fabric. When she emerged from behind the screen, she looked smaller somehow, swimming in his father's clothes, the sleeves rolled up half a dozen times and the trouser legs pooling around her bare feet. Her hair was still tangled but cleaner, and without the grime he could see that her skin was a deep forest green, her features delicate despite the small tusks. She was pretty, he realized with a start, young and scared and pretty. You can sleep in the bed, he said, nodding toward the corner. I'll take the floor. No, her voice was sharp, almost panicked. This one cannot take master's bed. I'm not your master, Nathan said for the third time, struggling to keep his patience. And you're injured and exhausted. You need the bed more than I do. This one will sleep on the floor. It is proper. They stared at each other in the firelight, stubborn wills colliding. Finally, Nathan sighed. Fine. We'll both take the floor. I'll get blankets. He pulled quilts and furs from the chest and made up 2 pallets on opposite sides of the hearth, far enough apart to be respectful. Nara watched him with wary eyes, her arms wrapped around herself. When he settled onto his own pallet and pulled the quilt up to his chin, she finally lowered herself onto hers, moving as gingerly as if the floor were made of glass. Good night, Nara, Nathan said into the darkness. There was a long silence. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. Good night, Nathan Torres. He lay awake for a long time, listening to her breathing slowly even out into sleep, wondering what in God's name he had gotten himself into. Morning came cold and clear, frost riming the windows in delicate patterns. Nathan woke to find Nara already up, the fire built high, the kettle steaming over the flames. She had swept the floor and washed the dishes from the night before and was now kneeling by the hearth with her hands folded in her lap, waiting. When she saw him stir, she bowed her head. Good morning, Nathan Torres. He sat up, scrubbing sleep from his eyes. Good morning. You didn't have to do all that. This one wished to be useful. Nathan bit back his automatic protest. Pick your battles, he told himself. He climbed to his feet and stretched, joints popping. I need to tend the animals. Do you want to come with me or stay here? She rose immediately. This one will come. They stepped out into the crisp morning, their breath misting in the air. The chickens clucked irritably as Nathan scattered feed, and the milk cow lowed from the barn. Nara followed him at a respectful distance, watching everything with wide, curious eyes. When he led the cow out to pasture, she hung back, clearly nervous around the large animal. "Have you been around livestock before?" Nathan asked. She shook her head. "This one lived in the mountains before the raid. This one's clan kept goats, but this one was too young to tend them." "How long ago was the raid?" "2 seasons. Summer before last." Her voice went flat. "Men came in the night. They killed the warriors and the old ones. They took the young. This one was sold south, then west, then to the auction house in Pine Ridge." Nathan's hand stilled on the cow's lead rope. 2 seasons. 2 seasons of God knew what horrors, passed from hand to hand like a piece of furniture. He wanted to ask more, wanted to know who was responsible, wanted to ride out and find them and make them pay. But Nara's face had gone blank and distant, and he knew she would not thank him for pressing. "I'm sorry," he said instead. "That should never have happened to you." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw a flicker of something in her eyes that might have been surprise. "Nathan Torres is kind. Nathan Torres is just a man," he said, more gruffly than he meant to. "Come on, let's get breakfast started." They fell into an uneasy rhythm over the next few days. Nathan worked the ranch, mending fences and checking his small herd, and Nara shadowed him like a ghost, watching and learning. She was quick and clever, he discovered, picking up tasks after a single demonstration. She mucked out the barn without being asked, gathered eggs with gentle hands, and learned to milk the cow with patient persistence despite her initial fear. But she would not stop treating him like a master. She ate only after he did, refused to sit unless he gave her explicit permission, and never spoke unless spoken to first. At night, she retreated to her pallet by the fire and waited in silence until he gave her leave to sleep. It set Nathan's teeth on edge, this constant deference, this reflexive submission. He had not bought her to own her. He had bought her to free her. On the 4th evening, as they sat at the table sharing a simple supper of fried eggs and potatoes, Nathan set down his fork and met her eyes. "Nara, we need to talk about what happens next." She went still, her face carefully blank. "Yes, Nathan Torres. I told you the first night that I'm going to take you to the county line and set you free. I meant it, but I've been thinking and I realize it's not that simple. If I just drop you off somewhere, you'll have no money, no papers, no protection. The first patrol that finds you will assume you're a runaway and take you back to the auction block." Her hands clenched in her lap. "This one understands. So here's what I'm thinking. There's a magistrate in Crestfall, about 3 days' ride west. He can issue manumission papers, legal documents that say you're a free person. Once you have those, no one can touch you. But it costs money to file the paperwork, and it might take a few weeks to process. In the meantime, you can stay here, work with me if you want to, and I'll teach you what you need to know to make your own way in the world." Nara stared at him, her amber eyes shining in the lamplight. Why would Nathan Torres do this? Because it's the right thing to do. Nathan pushed his plate away, suddenly not hungry. "Because you deserve to be free. Because no one should own another person, no matter what species they are." "But this one is orc," she said, as though this explained everything. "Humans hate orcs." "Some humans do," Nathan admitted. "But not all of us. And even the ones who do, well, they'll have to respect legal papers. The law's the law." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. Finally she said, "If this one is free, where will this one go?" It was a fair question, and Nathan did not have a good answer. "I don't know. Where do you want to go?" "This one does not know." Her voice was very small. "This one's clan is gone. This one has no home." Nathan's chest tightened. He reached across the table, then stopped himself, his hand hovering awkwardly in the air between them. "Then stay here as long as you need to. Not as a servant. As a guest. As a friend, maybe, if you'll have me." Nara looked at his outstretched hand as though it were a miracle or a trap. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and placed her smaller green hand in his. Her skin was warm and calloused, her grip surprisingly strong. This one would like to be Nathan Torres's friend. Nathan smiled, and for the first time since he had seen her on that auction block, she smiled back. It was a tentative, fragile thing, but it transformed her face, made her look her age instead of 100 years old. "Good," Nathan said, squeezing her hand gently before letting go. "That's settled then. Tomorrow we'll start getting you ready. I'll teach you to ride and we'll work on your reading and writing. The more skills you have, the better off you'll be." True to his word, Nathan began Nara's education the next morning. He saddled the gentlest horse he owned, an elderly gray gelding named Smoke, and led him out to the paddock. Nara eyed the animal with deep suspicion. "He's twice my size," she said flatly. "He's also about 100 years old and has the temperament of a lamb," Nathan assured her. "Come on, I'll help you up." It took 3 tries and a lot of scrambling, but eventually Nara was seated in the saddle, white-knuckled and tense as a bowstring. Nathan kept one hand on the reins and walked Smoke in slow circles around the paddock, talking in a low, soothing voice. Gradually, Nara's death grip on the saddle horn loosened, and she began to move with the horse instead of against him. "There you go," Nathan said encouragingly. "You're a natural." "This one is terrified," Nara said, but there was a note of exhilaration in her voice that had not been there before. By the end of the week, she could mount and dismount on her own, and by the end of the second week, she was cantering across the pasture with her hair streaming behind her like a banner, laughing in a way that made Nathan's heart do strange things in his chest. The reading lessons went less smoothly. Nara had never learned her letters, and the shapes made no sense to her at first. Nathan spent hours at the table with her after supper, walking her through the alphabet, teaching her to sound out simple words. She was fiercely determined, practicing by firelight until her eyes drooped, and Nathan had to gently take the slate from her hands and send her to bed. "Why is English so complicated?" she grumbled one evening, glaring at a sentence Nathan had written for her. "Orc language makes sense. Each sound is one symbol." "English is a mess," Nathan agreed, "but it's the language of trade and law out here, so you need to know it." She huffed but bent over the slate again, her tongue poking out between her tusks in concentration. Nathan watched her profile in the firelight, the delicate point of her ears, the determined set of her jaw. She was stronger now than when he had brought her home, the hollows in her cheeks filling out, the fear in her eyes slowly giving way to something brighter. She smiled more often, laughed at his terrible jokes, asked questions about everything from cattle breeding to the phases of the moon. He was getting used to having her around. Used to the sound of her voice in the morning, the way she hummed tunelessly while she worked, the sight of her curled up by the fire in the evenings with a book in her lap. The cabin felt less empty with her in it, less lonely. It was a dangerous feeling, and Nathan knew it. One night in early November, 3 weeks after he had brought her home, Nathan woke to the sound of crying. He sat up, disoriented, and saw Nara thrashing on her pallet, tangled in her blankets, her breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. He scrambled over to her and touched her shoulder. "Nara. Nara, wake up. You're dreaming." She jolted awake with a gasp, her eyes wild, her whole body trembling. For a moment she did not seem to know where she was. Then she focused on Nathan's face and crumpled, burying her face in her hands. "This one is sorry. This one did not mean to wake Nathan Torres." "Don't apologize." Nathan settled onto the floor beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. "Bad dream, memories." Her voice was muffled behind her hands. "This one dreams of the raid sometimes, of the chains, of the men. Nathan's jaw tightened. I'm sorry. I wish I could take those memories away. Nathan Torres has already done so much. She lowered her hands and her face was wet with tears. This one does not understand why. Because you matter, Nathan said simply. Your life matters. Your freedom matters. She stared at him, and in the dying firelight her eyes were luminous and full of something he could not name. Then, before he could react, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his shoulder in a gesture that was both formal and intimate, orc and human mixed together. This one is grateful, she whispered. This one will never forget Nathan Torres's kindness. Nathan's hand came up of its own accord, hovering over her hair, and then he let it settle gently, his palm cupping the back of her head. She went very still. They stayed like that for a long moment, frozen in the darkness, and Nathan felt his heart thundering in his chest. Then Nara pulled back, her eyes wide, her cheeks flushed a darker green. This one should sleep. Yeah, Nathan said roughly. Yeah, me too. They returned to their separate pallets, but Nathan lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about how right she had felt against him. The next morning, Nathan announced they would ride to Crestfall the following week to file the manumission papers. Nara received the news with a strange mix of joy and something that looked almost like grief, but she nodded and threw herself into preparations. She mended her clothes, practiced her riding, drilled herself on reading and writing until Nathan had to physically take the slate away from her. You're ready, he told her. More than ready. This one wants to make Nathan Torres proud, she said quietly. You already do. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Nara looked away first, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her shirt. They set out for Crestfall on a cold Monday morning, the sky threatening snow. Nathan had packed supplies for a week, knowing the journey would be slow. Nara rode Smoke with increasing confidence, and Nathan rode his own mount, a sturdy chestnut mare named Copper. They made good time the first day, stopping at noon to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch of bread and dried meat. This one has never traveled so far before, Nara said, gazing at the rolling hills stretching out in every direction. The world is very big. It is, Nathan agreed. And you're free to see as much of it as you want, once we get those papers. She did not answer, but something in her expression made Nathan's stomach twist. They camped that night in a hollow between two hills, building a small fire for warmth. Nathan had brought a canvas tarp that they strung up as a windbreak, and they sat close together for warmth, shoulders almost touching. Nara stared into the flames, her face pensive. Nathan Torres, she said suddenly. When this one is free, what will Nathan Torres do? Go back to the ranch, Nathan said, surprised by the question. Same as always. Why? Will Nathan Torres be lonely? The question hit him like a blow. Nathan looked at her, at the curve of her cheek in the firelight, at the worry in her eyes, and felt something crack open in his chest. Yeah, he said quietly. Yeah, I probably will be. Nara bit her lip, her tusks pressing into the soft green flesh. This one will miss Nathan Torres. I'll miss you too, Nathan said, and the words felt like a confession. They sat in silence after that, the fire crackling between them, each lost in their own thoughts. When they finally settled into their bedrolls, Nathan lay awake listening to Nara's breathing, wondering if he was doing the right thing. She deserved freedom, he knew that. But the thought of her leaving, of the cabin empty and silent again, made his chest ache in a way he did not want to examine too closely. The second day's ride took them through a narrow mountain pass, the trail winding between sheer rock walls. They were halfway through when they heard hoofbeats behind them, coming fast. Nathan twisted in his saddle and cursed. 5 riders closing quickly, their faces hard and their hands on their weapons. Nara, stay behind me, Nathan said sharply, raining copper around. The riders pulled up in a half-circle, blocking the trail ahead. The leader was a tall man with a scarred face and a deputy's badge pinned to his coat. His eyes fixed on Nara with a cold, calculating look that made Nathan's blood run cold. "That's an orc," the deputy said flatly. "You got papers for her? She's with me," Nathan said, keeping his voice level. "We're traveling to Crestfall on business." "That wasn't my question. I asked if you got papers." Nathan's hand tightened on his reins. "I bought her legally at auction in Pine Ridge 3 weeks ago." "I have the receipt. Let me see it." Nathan pulled the folded paper from his coat pocket and handed it over. The deputy scanned it, his lip curling. "Sale receipt doesn't mean she's authorized to travel. For all I know, you're transporting stolen property." "She's not property," Nathan said, his temper fraying. "And I'm taking her to get manumission papers right now." "Is that so?" The deputy folded the receipt and tucked it into his own pocket. "Well, that's real noble of you. But until she's got those papers, she's still legally chattel, and I'm within my rights to confiscate her pending investigation." "Like hell you are." Nathan's hand moved toward the rifle strapped to his saddle. The deputy's men drew their guns in a smooth, practiced motion. "I wouldn't," the deputy said mildly. "Now step aside and let us take the orc. You can file a complaint with the magistrate if you want." "No," Nara's voice rang out clear and strong. She urged Smoke forward, drawing level with Nathan. "This one will go with them. Nathan Torres must not be hurt because of this one." "Nara, no please." She looked at him, and her eyes were full of a terrible, fierce resolve. "This one cannot bear it if Nathan Torres is harmed. This one will go." "Well, that's settled then." The deputy gestured to his men. "Take her." One of the men dismounted and reached for Smoke's reins. Nathan's vision went red. He launched himself from the saddle, tackling the man to the ground, fists flying. He got in 2 good punches before the others piled on, dragging him back. Someone hit him in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. Another blow caught him across the face, splitting his lip. "Nathan!" Nara's scream cut through the chaos. She tried to dismount, but one of the deputies grabbed her, pinning her arms. "Enough," the lead deputy barked. He hauled Nathan upright, his grip bruising. "You're lucky I don't arrest you for assaulting an officer. Now get on your horse and ride back the way you came, or I'll shoot you where you stand." Nathan spat blood into the dirt and met Nara's eyes. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her face, but she shook her head frantically. Telling him to go, telling him to live. He had never hated himself more than he did in that moment, but he climbed back onto Copper with shaking hands. The deputy released Nara, and she slumped in the saddle, her head bowed. "There's a station house 10 miles east," the deputy said, swinging back onto his own horse. "She'll be held there pending disposition. You want her back, you go through the proper channels." They rode off at a gallop, Smoke and Nara disappearing into the pass. Nathan sat frozen, his hands white-knuckled on the reins, his whole body shaking with rage and helplessness. Then he wheeled Copper around and kicked her into a run, heading not east but west, toward Crestfall, toward the magistrate, toward the only chance he had of getting Nara back. He rode through the night, stopping only to let Copper rest and drink. By dawn he was swaying in the saddle, his face swollen and bruised, his ribs screaming with every breath. He did not care. He pushed on, mile after mile, until the town of Crestfall rose on the horizon like a promise. The magistrate's office was a small clapboard building on the main street. Nathan half fell off Copper and stumbled inside, startling a clerk who looked up from his desk with wide eyes. "I need to see Magistrate Hollies," Nathan said hoarsely. "Now, it's an emergency." "Sir, you need to, now." Something in Nathan's voice must have convinced him. because the clerk hurried into the back room and returned a moment later with an older man in spectacles and a rumpled suit. Magistrate Hollis took one look at Nathan's battered face and ushered him into a private office. "Sit down before you fall down," Hollis said, pouring a glass of water and pressing it into Nathan's hands. "Now tell me what happened." Nathan told him everything. The auction, bringing Nara home, the plan to file for manumission, the deputy on the trail. When he finished, Hollis sat back in his chair, his expression grave. "This deputy gave you his name?" "No, but he had a badge and a scar across his left cheek." "That'll be Garrett Cole," Hollis said, disgust coloring his voice. "He's been working with the Auctioneers Guild for years, shaking down people who try to free their purchases. The guild doesn't like losing inventory, you understand. It sets a bad precedent." "They can't do this," Nathan said, his voice breaking. "She's done nothing wrong. I paid for her fair and square. They can do it as long as there are no legal documents saying otherwise." Holly stood and began pulling books from his shelf, flipping through pages. "But we can fight them. I'll file an emergency writ of habeas corpus, demanding they produce Nara before the court. If they can't prove she's stolen property or that you've committed a crime, they'll have to release her." "How long will that take?" "Court convenes in 3 days. I can have you on the docket." Hollis looked at Nathan over his spectacles. "But I'll be honest with you, son. The guild has deep pockets and a lot of influence. This won't be easy." "I don't care," Nathan said fiercely. "I'll sell the ranch if I have to. I'm not leaving her in that place." Holly studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, let's go to war." The next 3 days were a blur of paperwork and preparation. Nathan rented a room above the general store and spent every waking hour with Hollis, going over testimony, drafting affidavits, building their case. He sent a telegram to Pine Ridge, requesting a copy of the auction records. He tracked down a sympathetic doctor who agreed to testify about the injuries Nara had sustained before Nathan bought her, establishing a pattern of abuse. He also hired a lawyer, a fierce young woman named Margaret Hayes who specialized in civil rights cases. She was expensive, but Hollis vouched for her, and Nathan emptied his savings without hesitation. On the morning of the hearing, Nathan dressed in his best clothes and walked to the courthouse with Margaret at his side. The building was packed, word of the case having spread through the town. Nathan saw members of the Auctioneers Guild in the back rows, their faces cold and hostile. He ignored them, his eyes fixed on the double doors that led to the judge's chamber. They waited for 2 hours. Then the bailiff called the case, and they filed into the courtroom. Nathan took his seat at the plaintiff's table, his heart hammering. Margaret laid out her papers with brisk efficiency. The judge was a severe woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and sharp eyes. She rapped her gavel. "We're here on the matter of Nathan Torres versus the county sheriff's office and the Auctioneers Guild of Pine Ridge. Mr. Torres is seeking the release of one Nara Silverbrook, an orc, currently held at the county station house. Counsel, present your arguments." Margaret rose and launched into her opening statement, her voice ringing through the courtroom. She argued that Nathan had purchased Nara legally, that he was in the process of securing her freedom, and that the seizure had been unlawful and motivated by the guild's financial interests rather than legitimate law enforcement concerns. The guild's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, countered that Nathan had failed to secure proper travel authorization, that Nara was a potential flight risk, and that the guild had a legitimate interest in preventing fraudulent manumission claims. The hearing lasted 6 hours. Witnesses were called, documents were submitted, arguments flew back and forth. Nathan sat rigid in his chair, his hands clenched in his lap, barely daring to breathe. Finally, the judge rapped her gavel. "Enough. I've heard sufficient testimony. I'm ready to issue a ruling." The courtroom fell silent. Nathan's heart stopped. "The seizure of Nara Silverbrook was procedurally questionable," the judge said slowly. "However, the law does require proper documentation for the transport of purchased chattel across county lines. Mr. Torres failed to secure that documentation." Nathan's heart sank. "That said," the judge continued, "the spirit of the law is to prevent trafficking and abuse, not to obstruct lawful manumission proceedings. I find that Mr. Torres acted in good faith, and that the Guild's objections are financially rather than legally motivated." She turned her sharp gaze on the Guild's lawyer. "I will not allow this court to be used as a tool of economic intimidation." The lawyer started to protest, but the judge cut him off with a look. "My ruling is as follows. Nara Silverbrook is to be released immediately into Mr. Torres's custody. Mr. Torres will file for manumission within 30 days, and the court will expedite the paperwork. If the Guild wishes to contest the manumission itself, they may do so at that hearing. But the seizure is overturned. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell like a thunderclap. Nathan nearly collapsed in his chair. Margaret gripped his shoulder, her face split in a triumphant grin. "We won." "We won," Nathan repeated numbly. Then it hit him and he lunged to his feet. "Where is she?" "Where's the station house?" "I'll take you," Margaret said. They rode out together, Margaret in a hired buggy and Nathan on copper. The station house was a squat stone building surrounded by a high fence. Nathan dismounted and stormed through the front door, Margaret at his heels. A startled officer looked up from his desk. "I'm here for Nara Silverbrook," Nathan said, slamming the judge's order onto the desk. "Release her. Now." The officer read the order, his face going sour, but he could not argue with a court directive. He pulled a ring of keys from his belt and led them down a narrow hallway to a row of cells. Nathan's stomach churned at the sight of the iron bars, the cold stone floors, and then he saw her. Nara was huddled in the corner of the last cell, her knees drawn up to her chest, her hair hanging in tangled curtains around her face. She looked up as they approached, and her eyes went wide with disbelief. "Nathan Torres." "I'm here," Nathan said, his voice breaking. "I'm getting you out." The officer unlocked the cell and Nara stumbled out, straight into Nathan's arms. He caught her, holding her tight, and she clung to him like he was the only solid thing in the world. She was shaking, her breath coming in short gasps, and Nathan buried his face in her hair and held on. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I should have protected you." "Nathan Torres came back," Nara said, wonder in her voice. This one thought Nathan Torres would give up. "Never," Nathan said fiercely. "I'll never give up on you." They stood there in the hallway, holding each other until Margaret cleared her throat gently. "We should go. The Guild might try to appeal." Nathan pulled back just enough to look at Nara's face. Her eyes were red, her cheeks streaked with tears, but she was smiling. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the dampness. "Come on, let's go home." They rode back to Crestfall together, Nara on Smoke and Nathan on Copper, Margaret's buggy trailing behind. At the magistrate's office, Holly's had the manumission paperwork already drawn up, and they spent the next hour signing and filing documents. Holly's promised to push the case through as quickly as possible, but he warned it might still take weeks. "The Guild will fight it," he said. "They always do. But you've got the law on your side now." Nathan thanked him and shook his hand, and then he and Nara checked into the hotel. Margaret had already left, promising to stay in touch, and Holly's had returned to his office. They were alone in the small, neat room with its single bed and washstand. "This one can sleep on the floor," Nara said automatically. "No," Nathan said. You take the bed, I'll take the floor. Nathan Torres, Nara, please. He turned to face her, exhaustion and emotion crashing over him in a wave. Just this once, let me take care of you without arguing. She stared at him and then, slowly, she nodded. All right. They prepared for bed in awkward silence, Nara washing at the basin while Nathan turned his back. When he finally stretched out on the floor with a spare blanket, he was asleep almost before his head hit the pillow. He woke in the night to find Nara kneeling beside him, her hand hovering over his shoulder. Nathan Torres, she whispered, are you awake? I am now. He pushed himself up on one elbow, blinking sleep from his eyes. What's wrong? Nothing is wrong. She hesitated, then said in a rush, this one needs to say something and this one does not know how. Nathan sat up fully, suddenly awake. Okay, I'm listening. Nara took a shaky breath. Nathan Torres has given this one everything, freedom, safety, kindness. This one knows that Nathan Torres does not wish to own this one. This one understands that, but this one must tell Nathan Torres that this one does not wish to leave. Nathan's heart stuttered. What? When the papers are finished, this one will be free to go anywhere, Nara said, the words tumbling out faster now. But this one does not want to go anywhere. This one wants to stay with Nathan Torres, not because this one is owned, not because this one owes a debt, but because this one chooses to. Because this one has never felt safe until Nathan Torres. Because this one smiles more with Nathan Torres than this one ever did before. Because this one, she stopped, her face flushing darker. Because this one feels things that this one does not have words for. Nathan could not breathe. Nara. This one knows it is foolish, she said, looking down at her hands. This one is orc and Nathan Torres is human. The world will not accept it, but this one had to tell the truth, even if Nathan Torres does not feel the same. Nathan reached out and gently tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. I feel the same, he said, the words raw and honest. I've been trying not to, because I didn't want you to think I expected anything from you. I bought you to set you free, not to trap you in a different kind of cage. But Nara, these past weeks with you have been the happiest I've had in years. When they took you, I thought I'd go mad. I spent every penny I had and called in every favor just to get you back, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Tears spilled down Nara's cheeks, but she was smiling. Nathan Torres feels the same. I feel the same. He brushed a tear away with his thumb. But I need you to understand something. When those papers come through, you'll be legally free. Free to stay or go, free to choose your own life. If you want to stay with me, I'll be the happiest man alive. But I need to know it's really your choice, not something you think you owe me. It is this one's choice, Nara said firmly. She took his hands in hers, threading their fingers together. This one chooses Nathan Torres. This one chooses to stay. Nathan pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and she melted against him with a sigh. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the darkness. Two broken people finding wholeness in each other's arms. When they finally pulled apart, Nathan said softly, "We should sleep. We have a long ride home tomorrow." "Will Nathan Torres hold this one?" Nara asked, her voice small. "Just for tonight?" "Yeah," Nathan said, his throat tight. "Yeah, I can do that." They climbed into the bed together, and Nara curled against his side, her head on his chest, her arm draped across his waist. Nathan held her close, his hand stroking her hair, and for the first time in days he felt the knot in his chest begin to loosen. "Good night, Nathan Torres," Nara murmured, already half asleep. "Good night, Nara," Nathan whispered. "I love you." He felt her smile against his chest. "This one loves Nathan Torres too." They rode back to the ranch over the next 2 days, taking their time, stopping to rest and talk and simply be together. The tension that had hummed between them for weeks was gone. replaced by a tentative joy that grew stronger with each passing mile. They held hands as they rode, their horses walking side by side. They laughed over nothing. They talked about the future, spinning dreams out of thin air. When the cabin finally came into view, Nara reined Smoke to a stop and stared at it for a long moment. "Home," she said softly. "Home," Nathan agreed, and his heart felt like it might burst. They settled back into ranch life, but everything was different now. They worked side by side during the day, hands brushing as they passed tools, eyes meeting across the barn. In the evenings, they sat close together at the table, reading or talking or simply enjoying the comfortable silence. At night, they shared the bed, holding each other until sleep claimed them. Nathan had never been so happy in his life, and he could see the same joy reflected in Nara's face. But the legal battle was far from over. As Hollis had predicted, the guild filed an appeal, arguing that the manumission should be denied on the grounds that Nathan had purchased Nara under false pretenses. Margaret fought back with filings and briefs, but the case dragged on through December and into the new year. It cost money, more than Nathan had. He sold half his herd to pay the legal fees, and when that was not enough, he took out a loan against the ranch. Nara protested, but Nathan would not hear it. "You're worth more than all the cattle in the world," he told her. "I'm not giving up." In late January, Margaret sent a telegram. The appeal had been denied, and a hearing for final manumission was scheduled for the first week of February. Nathan and Nara rode back to Crestfall through a snowstorm, arriving exhausted and half-frozen. They checked into the same hotel and waited. The hearing was mercifully brief. The guild's lawyer made a final, half-hearted attempt to block the manumission, but the judge was unmoved. She signed the papers with a firm hand and passed them across the bench to Hollis. "Congratulations, Miss Silverbrook," she said. "You are now a free woman under the law." Nara took the papers in trembling hands, staring at them as though they might vanish. Nathan stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his heart in his throat. They walked out of the courthouse together into the cold February sunshine. Nara stopped on the steps, still clutching the papers, her eyes bright with tears. "This one is free," she whispered. "You're free," Nathan said, his own eyes stinging. "You can go anywhere, do anything." Nara turned to face him, and the love in her eyes was so fierce it stole his breath. "This one told Nathan Torres. This one chooses to stay. This one chooses Nathan Torres, always." Nathan cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, right there on the courthouse steps in front of God and everyone. Nara made a soft, surprised sound and kissed him back, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. The world faded away, and there was only the two of them, two souls choosing each other against all odds. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Margaret was standing at the bottom of the steps with a smirk on her face. "Congratulations, you two. Now get out of here before the guild decides to cause more trouble." They rode home through the melting snow, the sun warm on their faces, Nara's manumission papers safely tucked into Nathan's coat. They talked about the future as they traveled, making plans. Nara wanted to expand the herd, maybe start a vegetable garden in the spring. Nathan wanted to build an addition onto the cabin, give them more space. "And someday," Nathan said carefully, "if you want, we could make it official. Get married, I mean, if that's something you'd be interested in." Nara's face lit up. This one would like that very much. "Yeah," Nathan grinned. "Good, because I can't imagine spending my life with anyone else." They reached the ranch at dusk, the cabin glowing warm in the fading light. Nathan helped Nara dismount and pulled her into his arms, just holding her, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Welcome home," he said softly. "Home," Nara agreed and kissed him again. They were married in the spring, a simple ceremony in the meadow behind the cabin with Magistrate Hollis presiding and Margaret standing as witness. Nara wore a dress that Margaret had helped her sew, pale green like new leaves, and Nathan wore his father's suit. They spoke their vows under the open sky, promising to love and honor each other all the days of their lives. When Hollis pronounced them married, Nathan kissed his wife with a joy so fierce it ached, and Nara laughed against his lips, radiant and free. They held a small celebration afterward, just the four of them, and a few neighbors who had grown to accept the strange couple on the Torres ranch. There was food and music and dancing, and as the sun set, Nathan took Nara's hand and led her away from the crowd, back to the cabin that was now truly theirs. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her close. "Happier than this one ever dreamed," Nara said, resting her head on his shoulder. "This one thanks Nathan Torres for everything." "You don't have to thank me," Nathan said, kissing the top of her head. "You chose to stay. That's all the thanks I need." They stood together in the doorway, watching the last light fade from the sky. Two souls who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built something bright and beautiful from the ashes. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered, the herd grew, and Nathan and Nara built a life together that was rich in love and laughter. The neighbors grew accustomed to seeing the orc woman working alongside her husband, and eventually even the most hardened skeptics had to admit that the Torres marriage was a solid one. In the second year, Nara discovered she was pregnant. Nathan was beside himself with joy and terror, hovering over her like a nervous hen until she laughingly pushed him away and told him to go work off his energy mending fences. Their son was born in the autumn, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's pointed ears, and a pair of tiny tusks that made Nathan's heart swell with pride. They named him William, and he grew up strong and curious, learning to ride almost before he could walk. 2 years later, a daughter followed, and they named her Olivia. She had her mother's green skin and her father's brown eyes, and she was fierce from the moment she drew her first breath. Nathan adored his children, and Nara proved to be a patient, loving mother who taught them to be proud of both their heritages. The Torres family became a fixture in the community, respected if not always fully understood. Nathan continued to advocate for orc rights, testifying before the territorial legislature and corresponding with other reformers. Nara wrote a memoir of her experiences that was published by a small press in the capital and became a rallying cry for the abolition movement. But through it all, the core of their life remained the same. The ranch, the work, the love that had grown from a single act of compassion on an auction block so many years before. On their 10th anniversary, Nathan and Nara rode out to the meadow where they had been married, leaving the children with Margaret, who had become a close friend and frequent visitor. They spread a blanket under the stars and lay together, hands entwined, watching the sky. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked quietly. "Staying here, I mean. You could have gone anywhere." Nara turned her head to look at him, her amber eyes full of love and certainty. "This one has never regretted it, not for a single moment. Nathan Torres gave this one freedom, and this one chose to give it back to him. That is the difference. That is everything." Nathan pulled her close, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you," he said, "more than words can say." "And this one loves Nathan Torres," Nara said, smiling, "always and forever." They lay together under the stars, two people who had defied convention and prejudice to build a love that was true and deep and unshakable. The road had not been easy, and there were still battles to fight, both legal and social. But they faced them together, partners in every sense of the word. And when they finally rose and rode back to the cabin, to their children and their life. They did so with the knowledge that they had chosen each other, freely and fully, and that choice had made all the difference. Years later, when Nathan was an old man and his hair had gone silver, he would sit on the porch with Nara beside him and watch their grandchildren play in the yard. Olivia had married a blacksmith from town and given them 3 grandchildren, while William had followed in his father's footsteps and taken over the ranch with his own wife, a human woman who loved him fiercely. The world had changed slowly but surely, and while prejudice still existed, it was not the crushing force it had once been. On one such evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in gold and crimson, Nara took Nathan's weathered hand in hers and squeezed gently. "This one has had a good life," she said softly. "We've had a good life," Nathan corrected, raising her hand to his lips. "And it's not over yet." Nara laughed, the sound as bright and joyful as it had been on the day he had first taught her to ride. "No," she agreed, "it is not over yet." They sat together as the stars came out one by one, 2 souls still choosing each other after all these years, still grateful for the chance encounter that had changed both their lives forever. Nathan thought back to that day in the auction barn, to the frightened girl in chains who had become his partner, his love, his everything. He thought of all the moments that had led them here, the struggles and triumphs, the love that had grown from a single act of defiance. And he knew with a certainty that went bone deep that he would make the same choice again in a heartbeat. To buy the chained orc girl off the auction block, to fight for her freedom, to love her with everything he had. It had been the best decision of his life, and he had never once regretted it. As the night deepened and the air grew cool, they finally rose and went inside together, their hands still clasped, their hearts still bound. The cabin was warm and bright, filled with the sounds of family and love, and Nathan paused in the doorway to look back at the land they had built their life on. "Thank you," Nara said suddenly, squeezing his hand. Nathan looked down at her, this woman who had been his companion for more than 40 years, who had given him children and grandchildren and a love that had never wavered. "For what?" "For seeing this one," Nara said simply. "For not looking away." Nathan pulled her close and kissed her, there in the doorway of their home, surrounded by the life they had built together. "I could never look away from you," he said. "Not then, not now, not ever." And as they stepped inside together, closing the door on the night, Nathan felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. It had started with chains and an auction block, with fear and desperation, and a young man's refusal to turn away from injustice. It had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. The chained orc girl who had knelt and thanked him that first night was gone, replaced by a free woman who stood beside him as an equal, who had chosen him as he had chosen her. And that choice, made and remade every day for decades, was the foundation of everything they had built. As they settled into their chairs by the fire, their grandchildren playing at their feet and their children laughing in the kitchen, Nathan reached for Nara's hand one more time. She took it without hesitation, her grip still strong, her eyes still bright with love. "To freedom," Nathan said softly, raising their joined hands. "To choice," Nara added, her voice warm. "To love," they said together, and in that moment, surrounded by family and warmth and the life they had created, they knew they had everything they had ever needed. The fire crackled on the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the scent of earth and growing things. The ranch slept peacefully under the stars, and in the cabin Nathan and Nara Torres sat together, their hands clasped, their hearts full, their story complete. It had been a long road from that auction block to this quiet evening, full of trials and triumphs, heartbreak and joy. But they had walked it together, step by step, choice by choice, building a love that was deeper and stronger than anything either of them could have imagined. And as the fire burned low and the night grew late, they knew that they would face whatever came next the same way they had faced everything else. Together, as partners, as equals, as two people who had chosen each other freely and would keep choosing each other until their last breath. That was the true gift of freedom, Nathan thought as he watched the firelight play across Nara's face. Not the absence of chains, but the presence of choice. The ability to say yes or no, to stay or go, to love or walk away. And Nara had chosen to stay, had chosen to love him, had chosen to build a life with him that was richer and fuller than anything he could have built alone. For that gift, he would be grateful every day for the rest of his life. The night deepened, the fire faded to embers, and eventually they rose and made their way to bed, their steps slow and comfortable with the ease of long companionship. They lay down together as they had every night for 40 years, fitting together like pieces of a puzzle, and Nathan felt Nara's breathing slow and deepen as she drifted off to sleep. He lay awake a little longer, his arm around his wife, his heart full of gratitude and love. He thought of the young man he had been, walking into that auction barn with no idea that his life was about to change forever. He thought of the frightened girl in chains who had become this strong, loving woman beside him. He thought of their children and grandchildren, the legacy of love and courage they would leave behind. And he knew, with a certainty that filled him from head to toe, that every struggle had been worth it. Every penny spent, every battle fought, every moment of fear and doubt had led them here, to this quiet room, this warm bed, this life they had built together. Nathan pressed a kiss to Nara's hair and closed his eyes, letting sleep finally claim him. His last thought before he drifted off was simple and profound. He was home, he was loved, and he had made the right choice all those years ago. Nothing else mattered. Nothing else ever had. And in the darkness of their room, with his wife safe in his arms and his family sleeping peacefully under his roof, Nathan Torres smiled and let himself rest, content in the knowledge that their story had the only ending that mattered. They had found each other, chosen each other, and loved each other truly. That was enough. That was everything. That was their happily ever after, hard-won and deeply earned, and it would endure long after they were gone, living on in their children and grandchildren, and in the example they had set for anyone who dared to love across boundaries and fight for what was right. The ranch slept. The stars wheeled overhead, and Nathan and Nara Torres held each other through the night, two souls bound together by choice and love, their story complete at last.